Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm coming at you with another presentation video. And this is what I primarily am going to focus on in this video. I'm going to cover other things. It's been very difficult this week because of these other things that I focused on. But this may not seem like a big deal, but, you know, there was a little bit of work involved to it regardless. If you notice, I've added in this demonstration a new icon to each window on the screen. It's just this little down arrow. Now, I don't imagine that this icon will necessarily be needed for every single window, such as the viewer, combo viewer, toolbar, tool options bar, the command bar, and other windows that are pretty much mandatory on the screen in order to work Opentoonz. Like, you have the option to have them or not, but really they're already at their optimum size and configuration. But for the overwhelming majority, I think that this icon should be added to as many windows as possible. When this little downward arrow icon is clicked, it'll collapse the window into a free-floating icon. Here, I click on the down arrow. Now please, don't judge a book by its cover. There was a decent amount of work involved just for that. However, that's not all that I focused on, and not all of it is really worthy of its own video. So I wound up spending the amount of time that I would normally spend on just one whole video, and then realizing I can't even use it for a video because it's not really something to even advertise, and it's not even my fault. It's actually Krita's fault. And I went onto the Reddit forum for Krita, and I got some really convoluted answer that I have no idea how to implement as to how to fix the problem. But the main thing that you should pay attention to with this animation is the red visual of the object fading in and fading out. How do you create that effect? Now, it may sound really simple. At first glance, I actually thought that I'd be able to do all that with a matte out node, but that is not the way that it works, and I think there's two different ways that you can do this, but the way that I did it was really quite simple in the end, and all it took was a little bit of experimentation. Now, the stuff that you're seeing on the screen right now is at 1000 times speed because it's not the primary focus of this video, which is a shame because I really wanted to have this video be all about Krita, how to use Krita and the new SVG export capabilities. However, I feel as though the new export ability to SVG is completely irrelevant for Krita 4.0, primarily because once you create an SVG instead of Krita, you can't import it right back into Krita as an SVG. It winds up rasterizing it. So if you find, I need to kind of change this or change that, or maybe I want to use this little asset here or that asset there, no, you can't. It's just not worth your time. Now, I've created a few icons here and there that I'm pretty sure I can go ahead and share with the developers, but by and large, I think that I'll just share some PNGs with the developers and they'll just go ahead and create the SVGs and try to model it off of that. Now, I suppose I could be using Inkscape, but there's no point because as long as Inkscape doesn't seem to be optimized for a graphics tablet, there's no reason for me to use it at all. It's just not optimized for the modern day, and I don't understand why. I mean, there's a community behind it, and yet it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So I was really looking forward to watching Krita go into the next step here, but hopefully the next version of Krita will successfully reach that point. Now, I understand that the open source community is a little bit sensitive to criticism, and I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be mean or anything like that. It's just I was hoping to get a little bit more, and what we got is fine. It's just not going to be able to help me. And as for Inkscape, I don't even use Inkscape, so I don't need to apologize for a program that I'm not part of that community. Now, for the main content of the video. I'm sorry about all of that so far in the video, last 4 minutes and 20 seconds, has been me showing you content that I didn't want to have completely go to waste. Some of that stuff is a little bit useful, developers can still use it. What you're looking at on the screen right now is basically, I went to the audio file, listened to the first few steps of what the voiceover is describing. And from the very beginning, I knew that this specific content, I could go ahead and just record with screen capture. I didn't need to have a bunch of elaborate animations to show this stuff, to showcase the interface for Opentoonz. So what I'm doing is I'm just opening up a bunch of different windows. I snap them to the side of the screen, and then I go ahead and go to the rooms and kind of showcase what the rooms are and all that. Throughout this whole time, I'm not really trying to keep up with the speed of the voiceover or anything like that, because as long as the editing software that you're using is able to do some sort of time-lapse, speed up time or something like that, you don't have to worry about all of that. You don't have to worry about trying to keep up with the voiceover. You can just fix that in the editing room, and in the end I think it turned out pretty good. So like I said, this is me in the editing room. I adjusted the recorded video to match the voiceover, and the editing software that I use is Wondershare Filmora. It's meh. Okay. However, I think that the next place that I'll be purchasing editing software will actually be Steam. Steam is known as one big online store for purchasing video games on computers, but there's some software on it that's actually half decent that you can purchase, and the license isn't limited for just one computer like Wondershare Filmora. I have a buddy who's really into the editing process, and he praises a piece of editing software on there. I'm sure there's just so few pieces of editing software on there on Steam that it'd be really easy to find. Unfortunately, I haven't found any open source or free editing software that's actually worth a moment of your time. Some people recommend software like DaVinci Resolve and such like that, but I wasn't able to get the sound to mesh with the video, and it just didn't seem to do even the most basic things that basic editing software is capable of doing automatically. And if you have this really fancy piece of editing software and it can't even do that immediately, then in my opinion, it sucks. I mean, I guess if you have enough time to learn some in-depth software with a piece of software that's currently free but won't be free forever, then go ahead and have at it. I personally don't want to have any of my editing material be held hostage by some company because they once offered something free, or because they happen to offer a freeware version for a limited amount of time or something like that. That's something I'm not interested in. But ultimately, in my opinion, if you want to have some editing software, you'll have to spend at least $50 to $100. And editing software is kind of like car repair. It's kind of like that. If you skimp on what you're willing to pay in order to get what you want, you'll usually get complete and total crap. So if there's an option between the $50 editing software and the $100 editing software, I'd go with the $100 editing software. Now, of course, there is Adobe Premiere and such like that, which can cost upward towards maybe $1,000, or if you're wanting to go the route of renting the software. But yeah, I'm not into any of that. I just need something that's functional, and that's what most people need, actually. Just something that's functional. So Wondershare, it'll do the job. I'm experiencing a few problems with it every once in a while, but it'll get the job done. The file that's currently in the editing software is the final render that wound up being the Opentoonz collapsible Windows animatic video that's currently on my channel, and I'm going to incrementally replace the animatic footage with the finished footage in my editing software. Now, this editing file I've gone ahead and called Final Draft Presentation. Then I went to File, Save As, and I saved a duplicate file with a different name, and that other name is Splitter, because I'm not done getting my timing down for each scene that I'm going to be working with in order to get this animation done. Now, I've got the timing all laid out, but now I just need to grab each little section of timing and place that into each separate scene that will eventually comprise the entire animation. So with the splitter file, I go ahead and press play. Watch for each moment that the screen changes to the next image in the animatic. I cut it, and then I isolate the section and render that small part. I'm rendering it as MP4, and when I go ahead and render the MP4, I make sure that I name it by the same title that the scene name is going to be called inside of Opentoonz. That way, I can at least try to make heads or tails out of what I'm doing in this project. Because I gotta admit, there are times when I actually struggle with motivation for this project because it seems pretty daunting at times. Once I do this, I just repeat. I just go ahead and watch some footage, cut it, isolate it, render it, and then repeat. I keep on repeating until I have all the footage for the entire project with the timing all separated out that I need for the entire project. All that I'll need to do at this point, after completing this task, is click and drag the MP4 into Opentoonz, and then click and drag an MP3 rendering of the same clip into Opentoonz as well. So at this point, I throw in the edited animatic MP4 clip into the corresponding scene in Opentoonz. It took a rather long time for it to process, but I found success with the result. But one thing that I found frustrating at this point in the juncture was that it only gave me the video footage and none of the actual audio with the video. It's an MP4. I guess I don't understand why I just didn't get both. I guess that's just the way it is with an MP4. Let me know if there's some other file type I could have used that would have just included both video and audio. Ultimately, later on, I wound up taking that same MP4 file back into Wondershare Filmora, my editing software, and rendered the same clip again with the same timing and everything, but as an MP3, and through that MP3 into the same Opentoonz project. So I used the image from the animatic as my guide. So I created a new scene so that I could pull out the Snipping Tool and start taking some snapshots. Now, the Snipping Tool is capable of saving PNG images, which is a godsend. I took all sorts of pictures. Windows snapped, windows unsnapped, the viewer, the entire interface with nothing snapped. Basically, I took as many different pictures as I could think of because I really didn't want to go back and do it all over again. Once I got all the Snipping Tool assets, it was time to add some little arrows to some of the windows on the interface in Krita. So I opened up Krita and started to modify the interface a little bit. Once I had all of my assets that I needed for this bite-sized portion of the project, I went ahead and threw all of these edited assets into Opentoonz and used the Animate tool on frame 1 on all of the levels to place the assets to the scale and position that I needed in order to create an artificial recreation of the Opentoonz interface. In the end, it's not a true replica of the interface because I wind up covering things like the preview mode on the viewer and the play options on the viewer are missing as well. But all I'm trying to do is replicate the interface enough to accurately communicate what collapsible windows are. That's it. Once the interface is completely replicated, I need to highlight that these new icons now exist. So I create a new Toonz raster level because I wanted to use the geometry tool. Raster levels won't let you do that. And then I extended this solitary frame of the Toonz raster level for the full extent of the animation. Now, I tried different techniques to try to get it to extend without having to click and drag the entire distance. If somebody knows of some technique to automatically just kind of click and then it automatically extends immediately there, that would be really appreciated. I suppose since I had the X sheet set to the animation sheet, I could have just pretended as if I was drawing another level and that could have worked. Yeah, should have done that. So now that I had my highlight column in place, it became painfully apparent to me at this moment that I needed to have some audio cues to let me know when I should use the highlight squares so that they could fade in and fade out. So, like I said previously, I had to place the same video file that I initially made in Filmora, my editing software, and then the same file that I dumped into Opentoonz. I had to put that back into Filmora and render it as an MP3 so that I could throw the audio into Opentoonz as well, and that's what you're looking at on the screen right now. This is the moment that I actually did that. Now that I have the audio in Opentoonz, I decided to use the geometry tool with a highlighter level to make the red squares around the new arrows that I added to the Opentoonz interface. Once I finished drawing the red squares, I went to the Animation tab. I find the highlighter level and right-click on its chord, which leads towards the X sheet. And when you right-click right on the chord, it turns the color of the chord blue, which means that once you select what type of effects node you want, it'll actually be plugged into the new effects mode and go directly into the X sheet. Once you right-click and everything, go to Effects, Layer Blend, Transparency. Now, the transparency mode is a little bit like a matte. In fact, you can make it a little bit more versatile in conjunction with a matte, but we don't need to do that with this project. The transparency node all by itself will turn the entire level transparent, and you can play with its settings to control the opacity of the object over time with the function editor. So let's suppose you wanted to transition from one scene to another in Opentoonz, rather than relying on transitions supplied in editing software out there. You could use the transparency node with a level that's covering the entire screen to do the fade in and fade out action. No problem, it'd be extremely easy. Now, to use the transparency node, there is a way to do this without the function editor, but if you're going to do it right, it's best just to use the function editor. Now, if you've seen my How to Animate a Blur Effect video, you pretty much know how to work the transparency node. A card to view that video is on the screen right now. Only, instead of dealing with angles of degrees, you're dealing with 0 to 100% opacity. It's really easy to do. Now, just like with the How to Animate a Blur Effect video, you need to activate the preview mode in order to see how your effects are working in your animation. Now, you can watch that video in the card, or you can watch carefully as I talk about my 2018 assessment of the effect schematic, but more specifically, dealing with the preview mode and how it interacts with the experience with the effect schematic, because it's been a year since I used the effects schematic heavily. And it's not like I'm even really using it heavily in this video either, actually. I'm just using one effects node and 4 keyframes. And yet, the performance needs a review for 2018 just based off of that. Since this animation took the course of 60 seconds, so 1,000 plus frames, the render times for each frame was fairly unbearable. It seems like any time you need to work with the effects schematic, it's a safe bet that you're going to be wasting massive amounts of time on render times. This is something that I feel needs major optimization in Opentoonz. It's not some sort of showstopper in that Opentoonz doesn't crash with the effects schematic very often. In fact, it's come a long way in terms of stability and reliability in that sense, but only in that sense. The lagging render times are so awful that it's a showstopper in the sense that most people don't even want to use the effects schematic. Take me, for example. I would love to use the effects schematic more often. I would even like to experiment with it so that I could go ahead and provide tutorials on it. It's as powerful of a tool as any commercial software out there. Like, you'll be able to find just as high a quality out there in terms of what it can do, but the time it takes to actually make anything isn't worth it. I'd love to learn how to make an entirely new effects just by tinkering with different effects and combining them, but what's the point if 98% of your time is just staring at the screen and waiting for the program to execute your last task? The effects schematic is functional and stable, but nearly completely impractical because of the preview mode frame render times. Some people might say that makes it broken. Maybe not in terms of the stability and coding that's under the hood, but in terms of utility, it's the one part of Opentoonz that I would love to use more often, but refuse to use because for the time I put into it, I get very few rewards. It has tons to offer. It gets a 10 out of 10 for what it has to offer. But how would you know if it takes 45 minutes to make 3 squares fade in and fade out? I think that some of what we're waiting for the effects schematic and the preview mode's rendered times, and to get them to have faster performance, is for Opentoonz to eventually receive the OpenGL support. But something that can actually be done right now that would improve the situation about 30% is this. Something really needs to be done about the auto-saving functionality in Opentoonz, killing off all of your progress with what you've made with the preview mode renders. I mentioned this about a year ago as well, and I'm not anyone's boss or anything, but I'd love to see this aspect of the software become at least 30% more practical, because if you could keep the preview mode rendered frames after an autosave, that alone would make the function editor a hell of a lot more practical in a workflow for those on a schedule and a deadline. Now, it may not seem like it, but I have a weekly deadline I need to meet to keep my channel growing. So I'm actually one of those people. I try as often as I can to give the fairest assessment as I can about these things, and hopefully none of the developers are offended by that review. Now, the main problem is the preview mode frame render times at this point. That's what's preventing people from using the effects schematic. And as long as there's autosave issues and a laggy experience with it, I can't see me using the effects schematic all too often. I mean, I'll use it, but it's not going to be a primary part of my workflow. Once I'm done working with the effects schematic, I spend a lengthy amount of time trying to preview the effects animation. And just to do a playback takes a rather long time. But speaking about weird behaviors that Opentoonz has after I reviewed the animation, I went ahead and rendered it as an MP4. Now, once I click the render button, Opentoonz should do a quick autosave and then deactivate autosaves for the duration of the render time. And once it finishes rendering, it can activate the autosave function again. That is, if the autosave functionality was turned on prior to initiating the render. I say this because this was an animation with 1,000+ frames, and I had to render it twice. The first time it rendered, there was an autosave that initiated midway through the rendering. And I think it's safe to say that if I'm rendering my work, I want it as it is, and I've been staring at a loading screen, and no additional edits have actually occurred because I've been staring at a loading screen. When it finished rendering the first time I tried to render it, there was an error message. But that doesn't always mean that the render was bad, so I wound up watching the render that it created, and it didn't even play one frame of the work that I made. It was an MP4 file with literally nothing in it. The second time that I rendered it, I actually turned off the autosave functionality manually beforehand, and then I rendered it. When the render finished, there was no error message. And then I had to go back into Opentoonz manually and reactivate the autosave functionality. And I tested out the render and it played pretty good. Now, my suggestion to other developers to see if this is a reproducible bug is try this out. Get Opentoonz to render 60 to, I don't know, 200, 400 frames or something like that. And go ahead and set the autosave functionality to save every minute. I'd wager a bet that you'll get an error message about the render, and the render itself will oftentimes be either pretty much nothing or just a fraction of what you set out to render to begin with. Now, I know that this is definitely the case with MP4, so go ahead and try this out. And I'm only mentioning this because I feel this might be a pretty bad bug. The rendering process is the time-consuming final product of your work, and if that's encountering problems with reproducible steps manifested as a gigantic bug, it needs to be fixed. Once I had a successful render, I threw the render into my editing software and made sure that the timing was good, and it was. Let there be light. Anyways, guys, that concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys didn't like it, please like, share, and subscribe anyways. There's a lot of work that goes into these videos. And if you'd like to take a look at any of my other videos, feel free to click on any of them that are appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.